Hello, welcome back to the Caring Conversation studio, live from the NEC in Birmingham. We are here with another guest, Debbie. Debbie, in our studio. Do you want to tell us who you are and what you do, Debbie?
Yeah, hi York. My name's Debbie Carrol. I'm a garden designer who did a accidental research into why care home gardens were not more actively used, even when they've been designed to the latest guidance. And with my colleague Mark Rendell, we formed Step Change Design to share the findings, and we wrote a couple of books to help support and make the changes to enable residents living in care homes, and particularly those living with dementia, to be able to enjoy the garden as and when they would choose to do what they've done all their lives, really, and to allow that to continue within a care setting.
So let's talk about that then. Obviously, it's a big area of well-being. We know that the research says if we go outside, that's good for our general mental health, physical health, gets the steps in, etc. and so forth. What's the problem then? Why aren't people going out into the garden when they're in care homes?
Yeah, and the problem is multifaceted. Mark and I initially thought there was something wrong with the design guidance. In reality, we were taken deep within the care setting, inside and out, and deep within the organisational culture. And we came back to the realisation it was all about people. So the findings identified that those settings that are truly person-centred, so delivering the support of the wishes and needs of a resident, would engage with the garden naturally, because they're centred around focusing on delivering what that resident needs. And so those settings would be stepping in the garden. But for homes that are struggling to achieve person-centred fully or all the time, very quickly the doors can become locked, or a host of myths and barriers, some which are true and many that are misplaced, start to surface, and they become the norm quite quickly. And so engagement peters off, or actually is prevented, and even just completely restricted. And sadly, residents can't get outside at all. And you mentioned the science. The science has been around for decades that it's good for us to go outside. Vitamin D, well-being, all those things. But there's growing evidence as well that for people with dementia, it has additional benefits. There's even more important. It can help to regulate their sleep patterns. And for some people, it will also help improve appetite, which can be problematic for some people with dementia. And so simply stepping outside beyond that threshold has health benefits in a care environment.
I guess it can probably be seen as risky, right? Like there's, it was wet, is the path clear, is the going to trip over? Do you think that's a big motivator that stops people going out?
It's one of the big myths, that's for sure. Very often in various guises the garden is seen as more dangerous than inside. Very often it's no more risky. I would argue, from my point of view, as personally, I think bathrooms are more dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, there's no kettles in the garden either.
And actually, there's more to be gained. So, if the access point meets regulations to get in and out safely, then actually the garden is probably no more dangerous than inside, and it is just another room with so many opportunities. I mean, there was one care home where we went to, and we were told that there was an area of the garden that was cordoned off that couldn't be used, and so we asked about it, and they said, I've changed the name, but Fred died, unfortunately. He had a fall there. And so we said, gosh, what was the problem? Well, they hadn't investigated what had caused the fall. It transpired it was to do with his condition and not the garden. And we said, so when do you think you'll get this back in use? We're not sure. How long's it been cordoned off? 5 years. And so there was an incident. It hadn't been investigated. It actually transpired it was not to do with the garden, but everybody was denied access to that part of the garden because of it. And from it, there was even carers who had never known Fred who believed that area to be dangerous. But actually it was not, and this is how the myths perpetuate. So very often we say if people are blaming the garden for not going outside, or the weather, or any of those things, 9 times out of 10 that is not the case. That is a myth. 9 times out of 10 it's overcome through the way that we deliver person-centred care. And with regard to the weather, it's never the wrong weather, is it? It's always the wrong clothes. So, make sure there's a coat to hand or a brolly or the right shoes, and not just for the resident who wants to go out, but for the carer who's got to accompany them as well. I wouldn't want to go out in the rain without
we
coat.
should probably look at the childcare sector, who most childcare settings have free flow from inside to outside, so the door is open, shoes and boots are available at the door. it's actively encouraged as a kind of
they're exactly where we need to be getting to, and we're in some homes that's exactly how it is. It is completely free flowing, but yes, there's much more that could be done, and for people with dementia, if they suddenly want to go outside, there's a moment to grab. Going all the way back to their room for their coat, the moment's lost. And actually for residents...
Same thing with my son,
and for residents who love to be outside, get them dressed, ready for that in the start of the day. Make sure they've got some decent shoes on, so they're not going out in their slippers on a wet day. And then, of course, carers naturally will say, you can't go out, it's wet. Dress them ready to expect they're going to go outside if that's something they're likely to desire to do.
Yeah. It's really interesting. So is there kind of some ideas that you can share about, a lot of homes they're already built, and as we know, maybe the dementia floor is on the second floor, which doesn't help make things any easier if you've got to go through a coded lift, and then there's, maybe the garden's not secure as you might need it to be. Have you got any tips for homes about how they might manage that?
Yeah, the securing is probably a huge topic. I'm not sure we kind of want to get into that too much today. Most care homes I go to have a reasonably secure garden in the main. So in terms of other floors, yes, it's disappointing that people with dementia end up on floors other than the ground floor with easy access to the outside, especially knowing the health benefits. But as it does happen, we've seen really good quality homes in terms of the way they deliver care facilitate people going outside as and when they choose, regardless of floor. And so we've seen it possible, and that isn't necessarily homes with bags of money. It is about a mindset to deliver person-centred care. But some quick wins is always to make sure really good views from windows and doors, that they're not cluttered and that people can get to a window to see out. If you ask someone with dementia, do you want to go outside, and they can't see the garden, you might as well have asked them to go to Mars. You're more likely to get a negative response. So make sure they can see it. Make sure that doors and access routes from inside are clear. It so easily gets cluttered and difficult. It needs to be clear for someone who needs a facilitation on their arm, or wheelchairs and such like. And then when you get out in the garden, somewhere near those doors that actually is really easy to see the purpose. Seats and tables and chairs tell you there's somewhere to sit. They don't want to be at the far end of the garden. Make sure there's something quite near that edge space, if you like, that transition zone. And simple and domestic and familiar things. If it's a back garden, it needs to feel like a back garden, not full of gimmicks and gizmos, but the sort of stuff you or I or any of your residents would have in their back gardens of any home that in the UK, really. The more it's easily readable, the more likely you're going to get that engagement. It doesn't need to be rocket science.
You'd like to think a lot of homes would also engage the residents in working with the garden, that they might want to get involved in the gardening, and I guess you've ultimately got to take that on a person by person basis of what they want to do. But you should, especially through the summer, one of your activities a week at least be a gardening club, something like that.
A gardening club's a good way to start, and that's a fairly regular thing. The only downside being that I have been in care homes where gardening club's on a Wednesday, but of course if it's raining on Wednesday it doesn't happen. And Fred might want to go out in the garden on Thursday. So those homes moving towards more person-centred care tend to go out more spontaneously, but a gardening club is great if you need to bring in outside experts, or you've got days where more volunteers can come in and help you. But don't allow that to be an exclusion to more spontaneous engagement throughout the day. But stepping in the garden doesn't need to be about gardening. It can be so simple. If you were to ask all your residents in a care home what they like to do in their garden, you'd get as simple things as a breath of fresh air, sit with the paper, watch the birds, fill the bird feeder, as well as perhaps the more typical gardening activities. We actually do sort of suggest to care homes, activity coordinators, to review your activity planner and your activity that go on in the home, and just review it and check the default. Is everything inside? Is there anything on there that could so easily be done outside with minimal change or no change? It's just a change of venue. And actually that might interest different people as well by doing that.
Something struck me might be a good idea is to get a few to pop to, say, Tesco's, buy 5 different size coats and hang them up by the back door. That can then be just, if you get someone to the door, it's a bit chilly, I don't want to go outside. Okay, there's a coat right here, and that can just be sort of communal.
And some blankets. I've even had one home, they had like hot water bottle things, you know, those things you heat up that are quite warm for somebody if they're in a wheelchair and they get a bit chilly. But yeah, have things to hand. And it takes time for homes that struggle to get outside to work out what they need. So start small. Just expect to take 1 or 2 people out, see what you need, and make sure you build on that gradually and over time. But shy away from the gimmicks, really. It's domestic and familiar is going to make it all away, really.
Perfect. So anything else you want to share with us today?
I guess it is about that focus on your person-centred care delivery, because that's more likely to deliver engagement with the garden. And if you do need a garden designer, it will also make you a more articulate client, so you're more likely to be requesting what you need, not what you think you want, and that ultimately will give you a better return on investment as well. So yeah,
perfect. Right. Well, thank you very much for coming into the studio today.
Thank you.
See you soon. Right, we'll be back shortly with another interview.